Alright guys, Dominic here for Kit Guru, and today we are checking out AMD's new flagship GPU, the RX 6900 XT. This GPU was announced back on October the 28th alongside the RX 6800 XT and the RX 6800, and it's priced at $999 US or £899.99 for those of us in the UK. On a fundamental level, the 6900 XT is effectively the same GPU as the 6800 XT, but with 8 more compute units, and that gives it a total of 5,120 stream processors. Apart from that, it has the same 16GB of GDDR6 memory as the same 128MB Infinity cache, the same 2250 MHz rated boost clock, and even the same 300W total board power rating. Clearly, not much has changed from the 6800 XT, so let's get right into it and find out how much faster this new GPU really is. To do this, we used our regular GPU test system provided to us by PC Specialist. This consists of an Intel i9-10900K overclocked to 5.1 GHz on all cores. That is paired with the ASUS ROG Maximus 12 Hero motherboard, and we also have 32GB of Corsair Vengeance DDR4 memory clocked at 3600 MHz. For our testing today, AMD provided press with the 20.45.01.14 driver, and here we're going to be focusing on 1440p and 4K performance, as that really is what this class of GPU is all about. However, we do also have 1080p data, so if you want to see those benchmarks, as well as all of our other charts, head over to the written review on kitguru.net. The final thing I want to say just before we do dive into the game benchmarks is that for the RTX 3090 we are using a Gigabyte Eagle OC model. Unfortunately, Nvidia didn't provide us with a Founders Edition 3090, but I really don't think it's going to make much of a difference as the factory overclock on the Eagle OC is only 30 MHz, but I wanted to make it clear that it isn't quite a like-for-like comparison. With that out of the way, our first game is Borderlands 3. And here the 6900 XT delivers some excellent results. At 1440p it delivers an average frame rate of 121 FPS, which is exactly equal to the RTX 3090, but the AMD GPU does do better in terms of its 1% lows. This result also puts it 15% ahead of the RTX 3080 and 9% ahead of the RX 6800 XT. At 4K it is still neck and neck with the RTX 3090, but again the 1% lows are a little better for the AMD GPU. We can also see the 6900 XT is still 15% faster than the RTX 3080 and now 11% ahead of the 6800 XT. It's certainly a strong start. Our next game is Control, and this is an Nvidia title, and accordingly we do see stronger performance from Team Green. At 1440p, the 6900 XT delivers 95 FPS on average, putting it 9% ahead of the 6800 XT, but still 4% slower than the RTX 3080 and 16% slower than the RTX 3090. At 4K, the average frame rate drops to 48 FPS, which means the 6900 XT is now 8% slower than the RTX 3080 and 19% slower than the RTX 3090. Compared to the 6800 XT though, it is 12% faster. Moving on now to Death Stranding. Once more we see the 6900 XT at the top of the chart, delivering 185 FPS at 1440p, and that gives it a slender 2% lead over the RTX 3090. This isn't miles ahead of the 6800 XT though, as it's 8% faster, but it is also 13% faster than the RTX 3080. Increasing the resolution to 4K sees the 6900 XT perform identically to the RTX 3090, while it is also 11% faster than the 6800 XT and 14% faster than the RTX 3080. As for the Division 2 now, we've noted how well Ampere performs in this game, and at 1440p we can see the RTX 3080 is on par with the RX 6900 XT, with both delivering around 140 FPS on average. Compared to the RTX 3090, however, we see that AMD's flagship GPU comes in 11% slower. At 4K, the Nvidia GPUs do come on strong and pull away somewhat, however. Here, the 6900 XT is 5% slower than the RTX 3080 and 17% slower than the RTX 3090. Compared to the 6800 XT, AMD's new flagship delivers an 8% boost to frame rates. Next, we come to F1 2020, and it's no surprise to see the 6900 XT pushing over 200 FPS in this title when looking at the 1440p data. That puts it pretty neatly in between the RTX 3080 and 3090, as it is 5% faster than the 3080, but 4% behind the 3090. As for 4K, here the 6900 XT is 9% faster than the 6800 XT, but its lead over the RTX 3080 has been cut to just 2%. We can also see it has fallen 9% behind the RTX 3090. Looking now at Far Cry New Dawn, even at 1440p there is a clear system bottleneck going on, as all three of AMD's RDNA 2 based GPUs are delivering identical performance. Stepping up to 4K does paint a clearer picture, and it's a strong result for the 6900 XT. It averages 114 FPS, which is just 1 FPS behind the RTX 3090, so it is effectively a tie. The AMD GPU is also 11% ahead of the RTX 3080 here. Next up, we come to Gears 5. The RX 6900 XT is topping the chart at 1440p, and while it's barely 1% faster than the RTX 3090 in terms of the average frame rate, its 1% low performance is 8% better than the 3090. At 4K, however, the 6900 XT drops back a bit, where it is now 3% slower than the RTX 3090. But that still puts it 9% ahead of the 6800 XT and 10% ahead of the RTX 3080. Moving on, Ghost Recon Breakpoint is another AMD title, but Nvidia GPUs actually do pretty well in this game. At 1440p, the 6900 XT is just 3% faster than the RTX 3080, and it's 7% behind the RTX 3090. At 4K though, those Ampere GPUs really do pull away, and the 6900 XT is 6% slower than the RTX 3080 and 18% slower than the RTX 3090. Compared to the 6800 XT though, we're looking at an 8% boost. Next up, we come to Metro Exodus, and looking at the 1440p data, we can see the 6900 XT is neck and neck with the RTX 3080, which means it is 8% faster than the 6800 XT, but still 13% slower than the RTX 3090. Up at 4K, that picture doesn't change. It's still a dead heat between the 6900 XT and RTX 3080, while the 3090 is clearly the fastest GPU in this title by a 14% margin. As for Middle-earth Shadow of War, things look promising for the 6900 XT at 1440p, where it is 10% faster than the RTX 3080 and only 2% behind the RTX 3090. That changes pretty significantly at 4K, however, and we can see the 6900 XT is on equal footing with the RTX 3080, so its lead from 1440p has completely evaporated. Meanwhile, it's also 12% slower than the RTX 3090. Next, we have Red Dead Redemption 2, which is always an interesting one to look at, and at 1440p, the 6900 XT slots right between the RTX 3080 and 3090. That's because it's 5% faster than the 3080, but still 6% slower than the 3090. Stepping up to 4K, however, sees Ampere come on strong, and the 6900 XT is now just 2% ahead of the RTX 3080, so that's pretty negligible. Compared to the RTX 3090, it is 10% slower, and we're looking at another 9% uplift compared to the 6800 XT. We also test Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and here the overall trend is actually pretty similar to Red Dead Redemption 2. At 1440p, the 6900 XT is 6% faster than the RTX 3080, but 5% slower than the RTX 3090. And then again, at 4K, Ampere comes on strong, and we can see the RTX 3080 and 6900 XT are now effectively matched, delivering 76 or 77 FPS on average. We can also see the 6900 XT is 11% slower than the RTX 3090. Moving on, Total War games are well known to prefer Nvidia GPUs, and that is clearly on show here in Total War Saga Troy. At 1440p, the 6900 XT is 8% slower than the RTX 3080, and it's 18% behind the RTX 3090, which is, relatively speaking, one of its worst results we'll see today. At 4K, that picture stays the same as well, and we can see the 6900 XT is still 18% behind the RTX 3090 and 7% slower than the RTX 3080. This means it is an 8% performance uplift compared to the 6800 XT. Our final game is Watch Dogs Legion, and at 1440p, the 6900 XT delivers an excellent result, hitting 97 FPS on average. This puts it 11% ahead of the RTX 3080, and it's on par with the RTX 3090. At 4K, however, as we have come to expect, the Nvidia GPUs do catch up. Both the 6900 XT and RTX 3080 now average 58 FPS, so they're dead even, but the AMD flagship is now 11% slower than the RTX 3090. So then, that is it for the game-by-game benchmarks, but let's look at the big picture overview. Here we can see there is a fair bit of variation throughout the different resolutions. At 1440p for instance, the 6900 XT is on average 7% faster than its little brother, the 6800 XT, while it is 5% faster than the RTX 3080. Compared to the RTX 3090, however, it is 6% slower. And then up at 4K, here we see the 6900 XT is, on average, 9% faster than the 6800 XT, but it's just 2% faster than the RTX 3080. Compared to the RTX 3090, it falls behind, on average, by 10% at this higher resolution. So we can clearly see that the 6900 XT is indeed a very fast GPU. At 1440p, it is almost always pushing over 100 FPS, and in many cases it's more like 140 or 150 FPS. It can also do a very solid job at 4K, almost always delivering 60 FPS, but there were 3 occasions based on our testing where it did average just below that mark. Let's look at cost per frame then, based on the UK MSRP of £900. Starting with the 1440p data, the 6900 XT comes in at £6.67 per frame, so it is significantly better value than the RTX 3090, being 34% cheaper per frame. Compared to the RTX 3080, however, it is actually 33% more expensive per frame. Compared to the RTX 3080, however, the AMD GPU is 33% more expensive per frame. And then up at 4K, we see a cost of £11.11 per frame for the 6900 XT. Again, this is a hefty saving of 32% per frame compared to the RTX 3090, but it is the RTX 3080 causing problems, as the 6900 XT is 34% more expensive per frame. Moving on now, let's talk ray tracing. As we already said, the 6900 XT has 8 more compute units compared to the 6800 XT, and that means it has 8 more ray accelerators. Here we're going to go back and revisit 3 of our games, this time turning ray tracing to its maximum settings, to see how those extra ray accelerators improve overall ray tracing performance. Starting off with Control, this is pretty much a worst case scenario for ray tracing. At 1080p, the 6900 XT delivers 63 FPS once we set ray tracing to high, and that means it's barely 7% faster than Nvidia's £369 RTX 3060 Ti. RTX 3080 meanwhile is in another league entirely, as the 6900 XT is 30% slower. As for 1440p, the average frame rate falls to 41 FPS here, and that's a 57% performance hit compared to playing with ray tracing disabled. The 6900 XT is now 32% slower than the RTX 3080. Next up, we also look at Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and this only uses ray trace shadows, so the performance hit is less severe for the 6900 XT. At 1080p, it delivers 109 FPS with ray tracing set to Ultra, putting it 12% behind the RTX 3080. At 1440p, it can also still hold over 60 FPS with those ray trace shadows, and it's only 11% behind the RTX 3080. Compared to ray tracing disabled, we're looking at a 45% performance hit for the 6900 XT. Lastly, we also look at Watch Dogs Legion with its ray trace reflections. At 1080p, the 6900 XT delivers 58 FPS on average, which is on par with the RTX 2080 Ti and 9% ahead of the 3060 Ti. Compared to the RTX 3080 though, AMD's GPU is 20% slower. As for 1440p, here the 6900 XT hits 41 FPS on average, which is just 7% better than the 3060 Ti, and it's 25% behind the RTX 3080. We're also looking at a 58% performance hit for the 6900 XT when turning on those ray trace reflections. So that is it for the ray tracing performance, and the final piece of performance data we're going to look at is from Blender. Here we use Blender 2.90 looking at the classroom scene. The 6900 XT rendered this scene in 71 seconds, so it's just 4% faster than the 6800 XT. Don't forget that Nvidia GPUs also have the benefit of using optics, however, as the RTX 3090 can almost halve the render time compared to the 6900 XT when using optics. Moving on though, it's time to talk about performance of the reference card itself. This is actually the exact same cooler as the 6800 XT, and as we mentioned, they even share the same 300 watt total board power rating. The only new thing is that the Radeon logo on the 6900 XT is now RGB. Huzzah! So yes, you can now download a utility, and where it previously would be red, you can chuck in a few RGB effects. But let's focus on how this cooler actually performs. Starting with thermals then. Despite using the same cooler design as the 6800 XT, we actually saw the 6900 XT run fractionally cooler in terms of its edge temperature, hitting a peak of 79 degrees with a steady state of 78 degrees. So it is a couple of degrees cooler than the 6800 XT. This may be puzzling initially, as obviously we would expect the 6900 XT to be running a little hotter as it has more cores, but this is easily answered when looking at the fan curve. In our testing, the 6900 XT would typically run its fans about 200 RPM slower, resulting in the higher temperatures that we are seeing from that GPU. Of course, the fact that the 6900 XT runs its fans 200 RPM or so faster means it is also a tiny bit louder than the 6800 XT, and we saw a reading of 37 dBA on our sound meter. To my ear, the noise wasn't noticeably louder than the 6800 XT, and it is still a terrific result overall. I do just have to mention a tiny amount of coil whine was present on my sample, but it was only just about audible over my case fan, so when gaming with speakers or a headset on, it simply wouldn't be noticeable. So as the reference design of the 6900 XT is still so quiet, there is plenty of room to noise normalize to 40 dBA. Doing so results in the edge temperature dropping down from 79 degrees to 70 degrees, while the junction temperature also fell by 10 degrees. We've also added the 6800 XT noise normalized results to the chart, and as we'd expect given they use the same cooler and are both rated for 300 watts, the overall results are almost identical. Moving on to power draw then, we'll start by looking at total system power draw, which hovered around the 420 watt mark, so that is a negligible increase over the 6800 XT. Looking at graphics card only power draw, however, shows the 6900 XT draws exactly the same as the 6800 XT, with a 290 watt average power figure over our 30-minute stress test. This is simply quite remarkable considering the 6900 XT has an extra 512 cores, so it is a testament to the efficient architectural design of RDNA 2. Considering the 6900 XT consumes the same power as the 6800 XT, but runs 7 to 9% faster on average, it's no surprise to see it delivers better performance per watt across the board. At 1440p for instance, it is 7% more efficient, and only just behind the RX 6800 and RTX 3060 Ti. At 4K, it improves to joint top of our chart, delivering 8% better performance per watt compared to the 6800 XT, and we can also see it is 13% ahead of the RTX 3080. Next up we come to manual overclocking, and here we used AMD's Wattman utility. We maximised the power slider to 115%, and we were also able to max out the memory frequency slider at 2150 MHz. For the GPU core, our best result came with a minimum frequency of 2400 MHz and a maximum frequency of 2700 MHz. And in the real world, that resulted in the GPU core hovering around the 2450 MHz mark. This overclock resulted in performance gains of between 5 to 6% in the games we retested at 4K. It's not huge, but we found the same with the reference 6800 XT, and custom cards like the Power Color Red Devil and Sapphire Nitro Plus did overclock significantly better, so we would expect it would be the same for the 6900 XT. Power draw, meanwhile, increased to 343 watts on average with this overclock, and that is an increase of 15% over stock. So then guys, there you have it. That is everything you need to know about the RX 6900 XT. But should you buy one? First of all, we have to attach the now obligatory disclaimer that at launch it's going to be almost impossible to buy one of these GPUs. But I guess we can talk about, theoretically, how it stacks up to the competition. I've been thinking about how to conclude this video for a couple of days, and you can really make arguments for and against the 6900 XT. But in my opinion, for the vast majority of gamers out there, I think you would be better served with an RTX 3080. The reason I say this is because across the 14 games we benchmarked, the 6900 XT isn't actually much faster than the 3080. On average, it's just 5% faster at 1440p, and that drops to just 2% at 4K. So those are some pretty small, oftentimes negligible performance differences, yet you'd have to stump up an extra £250 to go for a 6900 XT instead of an RTX 3080. And that's not to mention the fact that the 3080 has significantly better ray tracing performance, and it has DLSS support as well. Of course, it is true that the 6900 XT offers significantly better value than the RTX 3090, but it is also slower, 10% on average at 4K, and in some games it can be up to 20% slower. Relatively speaking, the 6900 XT actually does best at 1440p, where it is 5% faster than the RTX 3080, but actually just 6% slower than the 3090. So if you are part of a likely very small group of 1440p gamers who want something that's a little bit faster than an RTX 3080, and you're happy to spend £900 on a GPU, but you don't want to spend £1,400 on a GPU, then I guess you could make an argument for the 6900 XT, but to me that just feels like an exceptionally small niche. The other argument for the 6900 XT though would be if you only play select titles where AMD does better than Nvidia, games like Borderlands 3 or Gears 5. In those titles, the 6900 XT is offering pretty much equivalent performance to the 3090 and can even be marginally faster, albeit with very fine margins. If you do only play those type of games, you would be getting equivalent performance but for significantly less cost. The problem with that argument though is that games where the 6900 XT is matching the 3090 are outliers rather than the norm, and I do believe that for most people the RTX 3080 is a better all-round buy. For me, the 6900 XT just isn't fast enough to justify its price of £900, as it's only fractionally ahead of the RTX 3080, but still behind the RTX 3090. But that is going to do it for this one, guys. If you liked it, toss me a thumbs up. Do you agree with me or do you disagree with me? Leave a comment down below. You can also hit that subscribe button, ding that notification bell, and be sure to read the full written analysis over on kitguru.net. In the description, you'll also find links to our Discord server where we'd love to chat with you guys, and why not consider backing us on Patreon, where you can see some of our content early and get access to exclusive giveaways. That is it for this one though, guys. I'm Dominic for Kit Guru, and I'll see you in the next video.